Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Mike the Principal podcast. Happy New Year. Welcome to 2024. It's going to be another exciting year talking about education with all my education leadership friends. I'm Mike Meechin. I'm a recovering high school principal. I now work as the Florida State Director for the National Center on Education and the Economy. I am working really to disrupt the status quo and help other educational leaders move their schools forward. I really don't believe that we can solve today's problems with yesterday's solutions. So I am excited to be back in 2024. The podcast was wildly successful in 2023, and I want to thank you all for listening or tuning in regardless of the platform. Don't forget that this is a multi-platform podcast, so you can watch us on YouTube. We're also available on your favorite podcasting platform. If you prefer to listen, that's totally fine. And don't forget, I can't do it without you, so please continue to help our audience grow in 2024. You can do that by hitting the like or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening or watching to. And then be sure to share us with all your education leadership friends or any educator that is in your life. Maybe leadership's not their thing right now, or they're not sure if they're a leader, which I'm sure that they are. But if you can share this podcast with them, I would be forever grateful. So I appreciate that and appreciate you tuning in. So again, this week, this episode is we're gonna get things going right off the bat. Coming into 2024, there's so much going on in the education space. It's always a really, really busy space. I know all my educational leaders out there know that. And coming into 2024 is not going to be any different. And at the start of the year, I read an article which was published in Forbes by Dr. Vicki P. She's actually the CEO of the company that I work for. So full disclosure, she is the CEO of the National Center on Education and the Economy, better known as NCEE. And she wrote an article in Forbes, which I will link to in the show notes, about 5 big issues that will impact education in 2024. And it really resonated with me. And as most of the things that I share on this podcast, it typically comes from something that's been shared or that I've read, and this is no different. And I got to be honest with you, it really I was thinking about how do I launch the podcast in 2024, and this was a great way to do that. Dr. P really highlighted some really big items that are going to be, or issues that are going to be impacting education as we move into the new year. And I wrote a response on my LinkedIn page, which again, you can access all my social media on the platform or using the link in the show notes. But really posed 5 big questions to educational leaders in response to the issues that she discussed in her article. And I want to offer them today in today's episode and also provide some commentary there as well. I think that Vicki was spot on in terms of highlighting some of the major issues that we're going to face in 2024. And I thought it was a great way for us to kick off the school year. So without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump into the topics. The first one is about AI's impact on teaching and learning. And if you have been anywhere in the educational space in the past year, you know artificial intelligence or AI has been taking our industry really by storm. And really the world by storm, right? AI, machine learning is going to be, it's not going to go away. So, and to be honest with you, it shouldn't. It has an absolute place in our world. And Vicki talks a lot in her article about the impact and really the scale of the impact that AI is going to present. And she uses the analogy of the Industrial Revolution, or even greater, because we're talking about machine learning that is going to impact every facet of human life. And this is really some of the technology, cutting-edge technology or bleeding-edge technology that we've been waiting for in our lifetimes. And AI, machine learning is it. It's going to impact our way of work. The question is, how does that impact us as educators or educational leaders, and what are we going to do about it? The question that I posed to educational leaders is, what steps is your school or district taking to ensure that teaching and learning is ready for AI and all that it brings with it? Because we know, and I know if you're an educational leader, you've probably been faced with the question about students cheating and how do we adapt. So that's a huge issue that is going to impact all of our education space in 2024, is how do we leverage that and deal with it? Alex Koros, who's another phenomenal educational leader that I follow in my social media network, wrote in a post, and I'll go ahead and share that in the show notes, but it was a video that was shared of a college student who was really disciplined with academic dishonesty for using a very well-known AI-driven editing tool. And I'm going to go ahead and share the video with you now, so check this out.
I have a public service announcement for you. If you have a paper, essay, discussion post, anything that is getting submitted to turn it in, uninstall Grammarly from your web browser right now. I had a paper that I had to write for a criminal justice class. I said, oh, it'll be an easy class, easy A. Wrong. I turned a paper in, got a 0. I talked to the teacher, the department head, and the dean, and I was unintentionally cheating using Grammarly. Grammarly uses generative AI to do its spell check and punctuation check and everything like that. So when I turned this paper in, I got a 0 because it was using AI. So even though it wrote absolutely nothing for me, I still get a 0. So if you have a paper and it's getting turned to turn it in, uninstall Grammarly right now, because I don't want you to fail a class like I did.
So this post brings up a dilemma that we're going to be faced with in society, and particularly in education. And the question is, where are the limits? But this particular tool I use in my everyday work. And to be honest with you, it's no different than if you were to hire an editor or a copywriter for your writing and your posting. And it's clear that in this particular situation, it may seem like the folks in higher ed don't really have a grasp for what is happening and the tools that are being leveraged by students. And really, that's something that we need to think about. It's our responsibility, and going to be our responsibility as educational leaders, to bring ourselves up to speed on the tools that are out there and what their limits are and what their limitations are, and how the impact that they bring to the table is going to impact our work, but also how it can add a positive to the work that we engage in, right? If I can have my writing improved by machine learning, then all the better. My writing's all the better for that. So how do we deal with that? How are schools and districts going to adjust as kids leverage new tools that are going to be constantly created over the next however many years, and AI continues to become a way of work? How do we leverage that, right? So if you have teachers shouting from the rooftops that kids are cheating, it's probably going to be up on you to figure out how do you better educate yourself on what's out there, and B, how do we teach kids responsible use of the technology? But then how do we use it? How do we leverage it as a tool that can make our work even better? So that is going to be a definite issue that educational leaders will be faced with in 2024. Another one that the article points out talks about engagement, advocacy, and agency. So student agency. And Vicki makes the point about chronic absenteeism. She presents some significant findings. And if you want to hear my take on chronic absenteeism, you can go ahead and deep dive. I do a deep dive in episode 14. And I'll link that in the show notes about how I think educational leaders can fight chronic absenteeism. But what Dr. P talks about here is how do we engage kids in the learning? How do we make school relevant for them again? Because for so many of our kids, school has lost relevancy. And the pandemic certainly impacted that, but we weren't doing a great job before the pandemic either. So how do we make our schools, our classrooms, our teaching and learning design, our learning models more relevant for the kids that are in our classrooms every day? And there is a direct correlation between engagement and whether kids want to come to school or not. So we have to, as educational leaders, certainly look at that and be ready to tackle that problem. The question that I asked in my post was, what is your school or district doing to engage all kids? And how are you ensuring that teaching and learning in your buildings and in your district has relevancy? And if you've not thought about that, like, you need to go back with your leadership teams and you need to put relevancy on the table. You should be walking classrooms looking for how our kids, regardless of their age, right? This could be K through 12. How are kids being engaged, and how is the content relevant to their lives? And if you can't answer those questions, you are going to have some significant tier 1 teaching and learning issues in your building. So how are you doing that? And in addition to that, we are in a day and age where students deserve agency in their learning. So how have you brought them into the learning? And that may be differentiating how we assess kids. It might be talking to them about what are the things. Here's the standard. What do you want to know more about in terms of what I'm going to give you as a teacher? How can we talk about, how can we bring kids in to provide them ownership in their learning? And then how do we make sure that our systems are designed so that we are automatically is not the right word because it takes work, but how are we advocating for all kids to be successful in our teaching and learning design? What am I doing on a daily basis to advocate for kids? And if that means if the systems are not designed in our schools and in our districts to make sure that all kids succeed, what am I doing as an educational leader to advocate for kids? Because it's about kids, and it is a close second, it is about teachers. And if I'm not advocating for them, what am I doing? And are my systems designed to make sure that they have what they need to engage kids and make the curriculum and content relevant? You need to go back and ask yourselves that question. And I'm talking about all kids. I'm talking about kids who are in our students with disabilities. I'm talking about kids that are on IEPs, 504s, our English language learners. I'm talking about all kids. We have to stop putting them in subgroups. And we have to start looking at them individually. And that is hard. I was principal of a school with well over 2,000 students. This work is not easy. But we have to design systems that allow us to really dig deeper, build relationships with kids so that we can advocate and make sure that our teaching and learning systems are designed so that all kids can be successful. The third topic that is going to be a big issue in 2024 is teacher and leader pipelines. We have talked about, and I talk about in episode 10, about how are you overcoming the teacher shortage, and I will link to that show in the show notes so that you have access to it. But Vicki Phillips brings up teacher and leader pipelines. She first talks about how there's a lot of great organizations that are doing incredible work in building teacher pipelines to school districts. So if you are not familiar with those organizations, I'd highly recommend you read Vicki's article in Forbes and make yourself familiar with some of the work that's being done across the country to bring people into the teacher pipelines. And it's also about what are you doing that is innovative to bring teachers to the table. And it's not all about money. Money certainly is a big issue, but there are some other things that you can do to impact the culture of the schools that you lead so that your people will want to come and work for you. So what are you doing that is innovative? And how is your team, your leadership team, getting innovative in building a pipeline of teachers to come and work with your kids? And then for leadership, how are we growing our own? Oftentimes, our rock stars that we need to move the work forward are already sitting in our schools. They're already in our districts. So how are we building those people? And I'm going to talk, listen, this year is going to be about asking tough questions on the podcast. And I'm totally fine with that. I have walked the walk. I have done this work. I have not always been successful, but I would try again and continue to innovate and continue to iterate. And the question is, how are we preparing our current leaders for today's schools? If we're not looking at the most current research, and if we are not tapping practitioners, if we're not listening to podcasts like this one here to help move the work forward, we are doing ourselves a disservice. We cannot spend time on fluff. We need to give leaders exactly what they need to move the work forward. And if we are building in other things that are things that they needed to know 5-10 years ago, that's not going to help us. That's not going to help us move our schools forward. So what are we doing to build pipelines and teacher prep programs? I will tell you that my organization, we run an executive leadership program, and I'm not going to talk deeply about that here, but we are extremely intentional about the depth of work and the purpose that we provide to educational leaders so that they can truly be able to have a skill set where they can critically think and pivot to meet the needs of their learners, but also understanding that those needs are going to be dynamic. They're going to be dynamic from year to year. How are you a leader, and what do you have in place to be able to prep your leaders and build a pipeline that is really going to help them pivot on their toes to be able to tackle the challenges that today's schools bring. So teacher and leader pipelines are absolutely going to be an issue we're going to face in 2024. The fourth thing is future-ready systems, right? And Vicky takes it from the angle about career connections and how are we designing CTE programs that are really relevant, like hyper-relevant, and provide real-world opportunities for kids. Okay? Because there's been enough conversation over the past 10 years about not all kids are going to go to college, and that's great. That's fine. But if your CTE programs, if your career and technical education programs are not on point and they are not providing kids with relevancy, go look at how welding schools are developing kids. It will blow your mind. We're talking about kids being able to use VR and augmented reality to be able to prep in real world situations to do things that they could not do just a few years ago. So are your programs, are they that relevant, and are they preparing kids for what is really going to be faced in the next level? That's the question, right? So when we talk about future-ready systems, are your systems ready to prepare kids no matter what avenue they're gonna go down? Yeah, there might not be kids that go to college, but are your CTE programs prepped and ready to go? But what about the kids that are going to go on to college? Are you truly preparing them for the next level? And I'm talking about critically thinking, and I'm talking about being able to problem solve. Is your curriculum, is your teaching and learning model really designed to prepare future-ready learners? And the question I ask, what are you doing right now in your building to build systems that prepare all kids for the future? Can you answer that question? If you can't, you need to bring that to your leadership team like yesterday. Okay? And then the last thing, and I have to prevent myself from diving deep into this topic, but the fifth topic that Vicky lays out in this article is about rethinking the way that we assess. I have led a school where we transformed the work from traditional grading systems to standards-based grading systems, and I understand why more schools don't do that work. You need to do that work, but I understand why they don't. It is an incredible challenge. But there are some things that you can do where you can focus on the application of knowledge. You can focus on building systems that provide students with feedback, authentic feedback. And do you have a system? The question I ask is your school or district a safe place for students to fail? Not just students, but teachers too. Can they experience failure, and can they explicitly talk in a safe space about where they made mistakes and not have it impact their grade? Is that the environment that you have in place in your school or district? Can a kid do that? Can a kid make a mistake and not have it impact their grade negatively? Talk about what they learned when they experienced their failure so that they can learn from those mistakes and then demonstrate their even deeper level of learning, because the greatest levels of learning happen when we experience failure, period. And are your assessment systems designed to be able to do that? And how do you measure that? But Vicky does a great job kind of laying a foundation out for what does authentic assessment look like, and what can schools and districts do to start to think about application of learning. And, so just recapping real quick the topics that Vicky hits upon. So we have technology in the form of AI. We have engagement, advocacy, and agency in our schools. Growing our own and our recruiting talent pipelines. What are those looking for? Are your schools future ready? And then rethinking the way that we assess. So if you don't have these topics in front of your leadership teams, and I don't care if you're a superintendent or a school principal, if you have not put these topics in front of your leadership teams, how are you going to do that? How are you going to do that tomorrow? How are you going to put these topics in front of your leadership teams so that you can start to engage? Because these are huge issues that are going to be facing us in not just in 2024, but also beyond. So that's what I've got for you this episode. Thank you again so much for tuning in or listening, regardless of whatever platform you listen to. Be sure to hit that like or subscribe button. It helps it helps tremendously. Regardless of the platform that you listen on, if you can hit that like or subscribe button, and be sure to share this podcast with any educators in your life. That's all I got for you. Till next time, see you later.